Gives me great pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to be inaugurating this conference. So, dear friends, honored guests, and brothers and sisters, on behalf of Habib University, I would like to extend my warmest welcome to all of you. It is my distinct pleasure and honor to serve as host and MC for our 6th Post-colonial Higher Education Conference. After a long 3-year COVID hiatus, we are finally able to hold this conference in person, and it's a world of difference. Yeah. Our access to the generous purse strings of the university's exchequer would, of course, not have been possible without the enthusiastic support of the offices of the President, Wasif Rizvi, Vice President Amir Hassan, and, of course, CFO Shah Noor. I'd like to thank all of you here for attending this event, but in particular, of course, to this fabulous ensemble of world-renowned, dedicated, and award-winning scholars. It gives me incredible pleasure to be able to announce our keynote speaker, Professor Shenila Khoja-Moolji is Hamad bin Khalifa al-Thani Associate Professor of Muslim Studies at Georgetown. Her work is resolutely interdisciplinary, disclosing complex ways in which gender, race, religion, and power intersect in global contexts. Her research focuses in particular on Muslim communities in South Asia and the North American diaspora. Her body of work, which at this already young age includes 3 acclaimed books and dozens of articles. Her book, Sovereign Attachments, Masculinity, Muslimness, and Affective Politics in Pakistan, earned the 2022 Best Book Award from the International Studies Association's Theory section. We had the pleasure of reading portions of this book in our senior capstone seminar on violence. And you really know that a book has value when it begins to resonate immediately with historical events not formally covered in the text. Her work is in this way an exemplary study of both the ethnographic and historical specificity of sovereignty, but also opens up new vistas for understanding this paradigm of violence. Her innovation in the now burgeoning field of works on sovereignty is to really bring to the fore the extent to which sovereign power is also fundamentally about the production and circulation of affect, of sentiment, of structures of feeling, in ways that can assent to its otherwise lawless forms of violence. Khoja-Moolji's latest work, Rebuilding Community, Displaced Women, and the Making of Shia Ismaili Muslim Society, was recently published this year and also, I believe, won an award, right? Anyway, without further ado.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. It is my distinct pleasure to be here at Habib University and to actually be home in Pakistan. I want to begin by thanking the organizers of the conference, in particular Professor Naman Naqvi, for this invitation. I'm also delighted to be in the company of esteemed colleagues and students and the audience here, and look forward to learning together over these 2 days. Thank you. So in my talk, I will offer some reflections on how focusing on everyday ordinary ethics might begin to repair the ruptures created by modernity, be it the separation of the spheres of deen and dunya, or, as this conference's abstract notes, the disintegration and distortion of the linkages between religion, ethics, and spirituality. I will think through these questions from the vantage point of my research here in Pakistan and in North America, largely with women and girls, and I hope that the specific cases will offer food for thought for broader consideration. During the summer of 2015, I was doing some field work in the neighborhood of Khyber, located on the outskirts of Hyderabad, Sindh, the city where I grew up. I was there to interview some girls who had dropped out of school. One day, the girls were late getting to the Jamaat Khana where the interviews were scheduled, so I decided to wait outside the entrance. Sitting across from the gate was a frail old man, perhaps 70 or 80 years old, having what looked like dal and mani. I looked at him, he smiled, I smiled back, and he busied himself with his food. He was eating slowly. There were not many people outside given the scorching summer heat of Pakistan, so my eyes kept fixating on him. I noticed that during the entire time, several makhis or houseflies landed on his plate, but he did not shoo them away. At one point, I counted 4 houseflies. I was intrigued by this, but did not have the guts to ask him why he was not shooing away the flies. But my staring must have made him feel awkward, and so he gestured his plate of food toward me. I declined, Bismillah Ada. But he had given me an opening for a conversation, so I proceeded to ask, Ada, ma kyun chona tha udayo? Why don't you shoo away these flies? Baba, hi makyun ba Allah ji khalkat ahin, inan ji rozi hitt likhal ahe, bhali musangad khain. These flies are also Allah's creations. Their sustenance is written here. They're welcome to eat with me, he responded. The educator, scholar in me wanted to teach him about houseflies, about how they are carriers of diseases such as dysentery, cholera, and typhoid fever, about how public health officials had now, for decades, warned us about these dangers. But my focus group participants had started arriving, so I had to rush inside to conduct my interviews. When I came back out about 4 hours later, the old man was gone. I tried to put this exchange out of my mind, but there was something about it that kept haunting me. I was bothered by the public health dimension of it, but it was the old man's expression of affinity with the flies, Allah's creations, Allah's khalqat, and his approach to the natural world that gave me a pause, because it felt intimately familiar. It reminded me of lessons that my uncle, a small zamindar from Tandobhago, had tried to instill in me growing up. My uncle had always talked about reciprocal relations between humans, animal, and land, about how we should not farm the land all year round, but instead let her rest, let her replenish. He used feminine pronouns for land, and while we can do a gender-based analysis of that, what I want to note here is that for him, land was not an object to be possessed or owned. Instead, it was animate, a living being with which we had to establish a relationship, and a relationship that was not based on exploitation and extraction, but on reciprocity. When the time came to harvest the crops, my uncle would be mindful not to extract everything for himself. He would make sure that there were enough false, mirchi, and kele left behind for the haris, widows, and orphans to have their pick as well. He talked of these villagers as having a claim on his supposedly private property. Maula ji zameen aahe, he would say instead. In expressing this sentiment, he cast doubt around his own property rights by recognizing that the land and everything in it ultimately belonged to his Mawla. This recognition of his Mawla's sovereignty then framed his actions, from not exploiting the land to sharing its produce with the needy and so on. In other words, his everyday actions emerged from his understanding of what his Mawla would want him to do. It is in these ordinary actions, when an old man decides to share dal with makhis, when another decides not to exhaust the land and leaves some harvest for passers-by, that I think we can observe what deen looks like in the everyday. There is an ongoingness and ordinariness about these men's ethical conduct that extends beyond current analyses of Muslim religiosity, which are dominated by the hegemonic paradigm of self-cultivation, as Amira Mittermeier has argued. These men practice their deen both by working on themselves and by working intersubjectively, establishing relationality across human, animal, and land frontiers. In directing my attention to such mundane actions and moments then, I am informed by the present Shia Ismaili Imam, Shah Karim al-Husseini, who has said that ethics bridge deen and dunya, faith and world. It is by looking at ordinary ethics then that we can reframe, not only reframe, how we understand religion, but also ask further questions about what ethics do. What do they produce? It is not lost on me that the old man and my uncle's actions iterated a form of relationality that I was deeply familiar with, but had somehow forgotten as I progressed within modern schooling systems here in Pakistan and in the US. This forgetfulness, as I later reflected, was not an accident. It was actually cultivated and is a characteristic of our present condition of coloniality. Since this conference is entitled Post-colonial Higher Education, I will take a moment here to reflect on this ailment, this forgetfulness. As we know, British colonization of India did not just entail economic and political control, it also included an active erasure of local forms of knowledge and its transmission. By the mid-19th century, the British were securely entrenched in India, and in 1857, Indians mounted a rebellion against them. To forestall future uprisings, the British sought to educate their Indian subjects in the tastes and opinions of the empire. They instituted a range of interventions, from establishing teacher training institutes and Victorian schools to book prizes and the Office of Public Instruction. Education was a critical technology of empire building. These practices asserted the dominance of English knowledges and displaced prevailing, often capacious understandings of knowledge, including mystical knowledge. Now, by speaking about knowledges in this way, I don't mean to suggest that European and non-European knowledges are without any entanglements. In fact, it is precisely through practices of silencing and erasure that epistemic privilege is acquired. That's why I often draw on Akera's use of the metaphor of ecology to conceptualize knowledge. So we're thinking about ecologies of knowledge here. This concept helps me to point to the historical and geopolitical conditions of knowledge making, while at the same time also attend to the nexus of knowledge and power. And so it is against the rise of English schooling that Muslim scholars had to figure out what constituted Islam so that it could be taught in as broad a manner as the mass schooling project that the British were inaugurating. And so began an effort to codify Islam and the related contestation about what constituted that Islam. What was that Islam that we will now teach? These contestations are a part of our inheritance. As a student at Beacon House and later at Harvard, I encountered Islam in the form of an Islamiyat or Intro to Islam course. In both of these iterations, Islam was codified and reduced to a set of foundational figures, key texts, and doctrines. Sometimes it was an ideology that inspired empire building. This reduction of Islam to the colonial construct of religion removed it from everyday life. It transformed Islam from being an experience, a fluid lived experience, to a set of ideologies, an identity, or a proper noun, as Faisal Devji has argued. As you can imagine, this process hides the density of Islam, the way different people understand the word of God, engage with it, express it, paint it, sing it, draw it. We forget its lived dimensions. We find ourselves in a situation where on one hand, we encounter Islam as a set of doctrines and ideologies, a black and white Islam. And on the other hand, we witness Islam in its radical multiplicity, in the stories of older women and men, in the farming techniques of our relatives, in the ginans and zikr at Jamaat khanas and dargahs, sites and forms of life characterized by vitality, agility, flexibility, and an ever-expanding sense of wakam. Ordinary ethics, like the ones I recounted earlier, are reminders of this capacious Islam, of conceptually and practically integrated dimensions and spheres of life, as Professor Noman Naqvi has said. To remember these integrations, we have to orient ourselves to locally manifest wisdom. Wisdom, the word, right? And such work can begin by simply pausing, like I did, to pay attention to obscure dimensions of everyday life. Indeed, when an exclusively public health or commercial lens is applied to the men that I just spoke about, they appear to be backward, in need of education. But when we pause to understand their worldviews, we are able to appreciate the different set of concerns that guide their actions. We are able to perceive how these actions emerge from their understanding of Islamic moral codes, as well as Sindhi traditions of Mehman Nawazi. So it is by contemplating the lives and narratives of ordinary people as ethical subjects that we can notice how faith provides a morally compelling pathway to the practice of collective social life. The lens of ordinary ethics, as anthropologist Leela Prasad notes, can enable us to observe how people live out moral codes in community and how they convey their ethical imagination to others. It is by paying attention to these lived ethical life worlds that we can repair the ruptures of maternity. In the remaining time that I have with you today, I will share my most recent endeavor to do so in a project that centers the narratives and memories of ordinary Muslim women. My project began with my grandmother, and I have written about it in my recent book, Rebuilding Community. In 1971, Nani, along with my mother, who was 12 years old at the time, had to flee East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, due to the civil war. Nani was already a widow at the time, caring for 5 young children while working at a restaurant. The war, as can be expected, jolted this family, which was always already on the cusp of poverty. But this was not the first time that Nani had been displaced. She was born in Gujarat in the 1930s, and given the famines and epidemics in the region, the Ismaili Imam had advised his followers to move to other parts of India or to East Africa, as more economic opportunities were becoming available there due to increasing trading activity on the Indian Ocean. And so at the time, Nani and her family moved to Mumbai. But Mumbai was an urban city. It was really hard for them to make a living wage there, so from there they moved to Kolkata. They lived in Kolkata for a few years, but had to flee again due to violence related to the partition of India in 1940s and 50s, and from Kolkata they headed to East Pakistan, Dhaka, from where they had to flee in 1971. But when Nani and her family landed in Karachi, members of the Shia Ismaili Muslim Jamaat formed a web of care around them. They were first taken to a refugee camp set up at the Jamaat Khana in Garden East, where they were given food and clothing, hot meals, 3 hot meals. My mom still remembers, she's 65 years old. An ad hoc volunteer committee composed of displaced Ismailis themselves had come together to help other displaced families. Members of this committee helped Nani find housing and subsidized the family's rent for over a year. The image that you see here is of the building in Karimabad where my Nani and her family lived, 6 people in a studio apartment. And I took this image in 2019 when I was conducting field work with the same apartment's current residents who were Afghan refugees from this time, also being supported by the Ismaili Jamaat. The volunteers helped enroll my mother in an Ismaili-run boarding school and provided tuition fees for several months. In this photo, you can see my mom. She is wearing the white hairband at the back. She and some of these other girls from East Pakistan had been asked to stay back that summer so they could learn the Urdu language. So this is an image from that time. In the meantime, an Ismaili woman helped my Nani find work as a housekeeper. The lives of displaced working-class Muslim women like my Nani, a widow with 5 children, engaged in the informal economy, working as a domestic aide, always on the brink of falling deeper into poverty, are not recorded within national or even religious histories. Also excluded from our histories is the labor of women who supported displaced co-religionists. It's not that these women are forgotten. They're indeed remembered and celebrated by family members, but they have not yet entered the official historical record of Muslims in South Asia. It was this potential loss of women's history, and along with it, their ordinary ways of living deen, that motivated me to write this book. I wanted to examine the role that ordinary Muslim women like my Nani have played in the making and remaking of spiritualized socialities. These women have not written books. They do not read or write in the scholarly languages of Islamic studies like Arabic, Farsi, or even Urdu. And so, to understand their Islam, I had to rely on their memories, the stories they tell, the devotional songs they sing, the recipes they create, the ways they understand and live out their faith, not only in formal sites like Jamaat Khanas, but also in places where we usually do not study religion, like the steamer from Chittagong, on which many refugees fled, the kitchen at refugee camps, the apartments in which these women set up makeshift Jamaat Khanas. I interviewed over 60 women who fled East Pakistan and East Africa in the 1970s due to civil war and expulsion. Even though my interlocutors were separated by thousands of miles of land and sea prior to their dislocations, they share ethnicity and religious tradition. They are Shia Ismaili Muslims who trace their ancestors to the Sindh-Gujarat corridor, so it's a specific group within Ismailis. As we know, Shia Muslims are a historical religious minority. They emerged from a succession crisis following the death of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Shia, over time, split into further groups as divisions developed over rightful successors. My interlocutors belong to the Nizari Ismaili group of Shias, who today are estimated to be between 12 and 15 million in number and spread globally. Their present imam, or spiritual leader, is the 49th imam in direct succession from the Prophet. From the 11th century onward, the Nizari Ismaili imams, first located in Egypt and then in Persia, sent out da'is and peers to various regions, including to the Indian subcontinent. A 15th century peer conferred the title of Khwaja, Persian for Lord or Master, to a group of his Indian followers, which over time modified to Khoja. Over the course of centuries, Khojas migrated from Kashmir and Punjab down the Indus River Valley to the Sindh-Gujarat corridor and settled there, engaging in subsistence farming or working as petty traders and farm laborers. Epidemics and famines in the region in the late 19th century weakened the economic prospects of the community there, and greater numbers of Khojas headed to urban cities in India or to the Gulf and Swahili coast. Later, during the 1940s and 50s, some of these families, like my nannies, relocated again to escape the violence that accompanied the partition of India. They headed further east to East Pakistan. So by the 1970s, you have a sizable number of Ismailis in both East Pakistan and East Africa, and both of these cohorts would have to move due to civil war between East and West wings of Pakistan and Idi Amin's expulsion of Asians from Uganda and broader anti-Asian sentiments in other parts of East Africa. So these Ismailis made their way to the UK, the United States, and Canada in particular. I interviewed women who belong to this displaced cohort. By focusing on women's ordinary ethics, we can discover the lived dimension of the Muslim faith and notice that ethics are productive. Ethics do some things. Ethics create, as Professor Nouman Naqvi said. So let me share a couple of examples. Of course, the book has many more. In the late 1960s, as anti-Asian sentiments were on the rise in Tanzania, Gulzar Qasem saw her chances of progressing in her career as a gynecologist diminish rapidly. She therefore considered leaving. With a couple of other Ismaili women doctors, she decided to take a test that could lead to medical residency in the United States. She passed and was accepted into a program at Emory University, and in 1972, together with her husband, Bahadur Qasem, Gulzar made her way to Atlanta. Through a contact at the Emory Library, Gulzar connected with two other Ismailis in the area, and they decided to get together in Gulzar's place. Gulzar recalls in an interview with me. We thought maybe we should meet every week, and maybe we should probably do dua together. And we all got excited about it. And we said, fine. RK was a great cook, so she would cook, and I would be her helper. And then every weekend, we would meet. While initially, this gathering only included Gulzar's immediate family and a couple of other Ismailis, they were soon joined by another 4 students who had moved to Atlanta. Gulzar describes this first Jamaat of 12 people. We all said dua and tasbih, and then we would have our dinner. And mind you, we were not all very religious or anything. We have evolved a lot. But at least we knew about getting together and having food and doing, saying our prayers together. Here, Gulzar mobilizes a different meaning of being religious, one that conjoins performing prayers with commensality and community, positioning this practice of religion against understandings that might limit it to the domain of formal prayers or exclude social life from its ambit. Iqbal Paru, then a student at Georgia State University and a member of this small Jamaat, remembers looking forward to those gatherings as a chance to enjoy desi food. Gulzar would cook biryani and samosa, so I would say I'm coming. She even used to pack food for me to take home, so I always had food for the next day. It was the only good food that I got. They, Gulzar and Bahadur, really took me under their wings. As more Ismailis from East Africa arrived, the makeshift Jamaat Khana moved to another congregant's apartment, and Iqbal Paru and Gulzar Qasem were officially appointed as its faith ministers. In 1973, several refugees from Uganda joined this small congregation. The members wanted more for their Jamaat Khanas, a larger space and daily services. The Jamaat Khana thus moved to yet another location, and that's the image that you see here. Gulzar recalls that while the request for morning and evening prayers came from the patriarchs of the Ugandan families, it was actually the women who did the work that kept the Jamaat Khana running. Quote, "One person would be in charge of cleanup and do everything. We vacuumed every time after Khane. They would vacuum. It was mainly done by women, like food offerings and all that stuff. So that really created the environment that we were used to traditionally. And in fact, whoever came early did the agarbatti. We always had agarbatti. So we ran the Jamaat Khana as a very formal place, and the women basically kept it clean and went on with the traditions." As geographer Phil Hubbard has suggested, place emerges as a particular form of space through acts of naming, as well as through the distinctive activities and imaginings associated with particular spaces. For the newly transplanted Ismailis in Atlanta, the seemingly quotidian activities of preparing food offerings, vacuuming, and burning agarbattis were sensory reminders of Jamaat Khanas in East Africa. These activities transformed a repurposed house or a storefront into a spiritual place. So that's, again, the connection between ethics and spiritual that Professor Naman Naqvi mentioned. Establishing makeshift sacred places, according to Rhys-Jones, entails a negotiation between sacred acts and profane settings, challenging the established notion of sacred space as absolute space. We see Gulzar challenging the idea that space is absolutely sacred or profane by adapting sacred conventions to temporarily and repeatedly make her living room a place where the sacred can transpire. Thus, women's seemingly routine activities maintained spiritual connection and fashioned a continuity of traditions, as Gulzar's words remind us. We see similar efforts made by Leila Datu, but this time at a refugee camp. When the expulsion decree was announced in Uganda in August of 1972, Leila was away from home visiting friends in Nairobi. Her friends urged her not to return to Uganda, but Leila also remembers struggling to obtain permission to stay in Kenya as her Ugandan citizenship had been revoked. Without a passport, she could not travel elsewhere either. In the end, the United Nations Higher Commissioner for Refugees came to rescue the few thousand Ugandans who had remained in the region after Idi Amin's deadline had passed. Leila and these other stateless Asians boarded United Nations planes and were transported them to refugee camps across Europe. Leila arrived at the Colonia Triste camp in Italy in November 1972 and remained there for 6 months. Over 90% of the camp residents were Ismailis, and Leila describes the routine acts of care that she and others undertook to forge a community. She tells me that on their first morning, they were served something soup-like, which turned out to be octopus. Nobody drank it, probably. But then we are Ismailis, and we are volunteers, and we have worked, and we know. So we told them, the camp staff, we will cook, and we started cooking biryani and everything. After an Ismaili woman died during childbirth, Leila was one of the women who cared for the baby while the father tended to the 2 older children. She recalls, "Everybody took care of the baby, the whole camp. We helped each other. We were Ismailis." Leila also assisted the elderly residents who needed help with their personal hygiene. Quote, "These old ladies who they had brought into the camp, they came a month before us, or 15 days, I don't know how long, but nobody was there to take care of them. Nobody gave them shower. Completely old ladies, you know, like in the wheelchairs." Leila remembers walking the women to the bathroom and cleaning their bedpans. A hallway at the camp was sectioned off and labeled as Jamaat Khana, with regular performance of rituals in the mornings, afternoons, and evenings. Leila recalls, "Even in there, we opened up Jamaat Khana and we all said tasbih, mushkil asanji, lambi lambi tasbih." Leila further contributed to the spiritual sustenance of this transient congregation by recreating the rhythm of daily life around prayers. Since she regularly awoke around 4 a.m. for bandagi, the camp's residents nominated her for the task of waking up other worshippers. Religious festivals added another dimension to community making in transit. Layla and the residents found themselves at the camp on December 13th, the birthday of their imam, celebrated by Ismailis globally as a Khushhali, or Day of Happiness. Layla remembers dressing up for the occasion and trying to replicate the program of festivities that they knew from Uganda. Prayers, then dinner, then dandiya and music. Getting together for the religious festival and sharing food and music enabled the residents to find joy, a sentiment not normally associated with the refugee camp experience. Such activities transformed the otherwise drab and dull site of the camp temporarily into a space of spiritual rejuvenation. Celebrating their imam's birthday was a reminder of his presence and benevolent grace. When I asked my interlocutors to explain the motivations for their actions, they often cited the Ismaili imam's farmans on unity of community and support of its members, Quranic notions of tawheed and ihsan, in addition to hadith and ginans. Specifically, many of my interlocutors, such as Gulzar Qasem, described their ordinary activities as seva. Seva is a Sanskrit word used to express devotion and service to a supreme deity with whom the devotee has a personal relationship. This term is used by some contemporary Ismailis of South Asian descent to denote service to the imam, as well as to individuals and institutions in the Ismaili community and beyond. Other terms, like khidmat, are also used to denote the same idea of service. When I asked J.A. about why she used the term seva to describe her work on the Jamaat Khana cleaning committee, she explained, seva is good works that are a form of prayer. Seva is sreva. She then proceeded to explain this wordplay to me by reciting a verse from a Ginan in which the term sreva, which means to worship, is used. Eji kahore jivat mein kis karan aaya ji, nakidi sahib jini sreva ji. O man, if you did not worship the Lord, then say, why have you come? J.A. appears to understand seva as broadly equivalent to ethical conduct, which in turn is recognized as a form of worship because it's anchored in a consciousness of the Lord. But not all women use the emic terms of seva or khidmat to describe their care practices. Layla Datu, whom we just met, described her activities at the transit camp in Italy by insisting that she undertook this work, quote, because we were Ismailis. In Layla's case, we then see how an ethos of care becomes lodged in subjectivity. Philosopher Anne-Marie Moll argues that in care, qualification does not precede practices, but forms a part of them. In this sense, Layla's care for fellow Ismailis was the means through which she simultaneously discovered, expressed, and practiced her religious subjectivity. Ismaili moral codes in these instances become manifest through mundane care activities in the flow of everyday life, where qualification is not deemed crucial. Cleaning an elder's bedpan and looking after a baby become tasks that one does as a matter of a religious sensibility anchored in an ethos of care. We helped each other. We were Ismailis, as Layla insisted. The Ismaili sociality that I have described in Atlanta and at the refugee camp in Italy has a strong collectivist impetus, in part due to the central authority of the Shia Ismaili Imam. It is helpful here to understand that obedience to the Imam is a key tenet of Shia Ismaili spirituality. When the Imam urges his followers to support the weakest member of the community, to be united, to show generosity, or to engage in mutual support, these statements are understood as directives and not optional practices, as my interlocutor, Dilshad Sadruddin, repeatedly emphasized to me. When a farman from Imam arrives, that's it, you must follow it. This allegiance unites all Ismaili Muslims worldwide. I therefore read my interlocutors' practices as expressing an ethic of care for community that is uniquely Ismaili in its motivations, if not necessarily in the service tasks that it motivates. It is one manner of living a Muslim life in which members of this audience may identify points of commonality as well as difference. Moreover, my interlocutors did not rationalize all their actions by reference to Islam. Other sources of moral guidance, from encounters with other religious traditions and practitioners to gifts and sympathetic words from a neighbor, also have a place in framing women's ethical practices. When some of my interlocutors use the term khidmat, while others use seva to describe the same service tasks, we can see how deen is understood and expressed within the crucible of language and culture. It is helpful, therefore, to understand the ordinary ethics practiced by my interlocutors as not delinked from everyday life, Indic intellectual traditions, and other moral frameworks, but instead as intersecting with them as sources for reflection and action. Recognizing this dense landscape of moral guidance does not preclude us from observing that certain pronouncements, such as the Quran and the Imam's firmans, take discursive dominance in the lives of many of my interlocutors. What this broader approach offers is the possibility of recognizing Islam as an overwhelming presence in women's lives, while not reducing everything they do to a single explanatory framework. So instead of boundaries and divisions, we see intersections, connections, alliances, pluralities. Through the case of Shia Ismaili women, I have tried to illuminate how ordinary ethics bridge deen and dunya, how women understand and express their deen through feminized care work. In this case study, the reparative dimension of ordinary ethics is obvious because we're talking about a people who were displaced and dispossessed. But beyond the immediate relief these women's activities, they also show how a group that has experienced a space-time rupture refashions itself as a jamaat in the here and now, and also symbolically. Scholars of Islam have long paid attention to the project of ethical self-cultivation. And self-cultivation is not, of course, wholly absent from the practices I consider. For example, when my mother, Farida, shows up at the DeKalb County Clinic to serve as an interpreter for Ramzan Bhai, but he does not show up, she must practice sabr, evidently a task of self-cultivation. But I am more interested in the moment when Farida chooses to reschedule, offering her interpretation help the next day as an action that iterates community. She attends to her imam's guidance, help where help is needed, that's a line from a farman, and chooses an action, interpretation help, that maintains spiritual kinship. Ordinary ethics then do something, they're creative. They produce relationships and iterate social arrangements that become the conditions within which capacity for further ethical action can be cultivated. And while I have focused on a specific case, I have no doubt that members of this audience can detect such modes of ethical intersubjectivity in other communities as well. In fact, I would venture to say that the old man from Khyber and my uncle from Tandobago must sound familiar too. A decade or so ago, a corporation offered to buy my uncle's small plot of land. While my uncle used to practice multi-crop farming so that the soil replenished itself during the off-season, the buyer saw an opportunity to grow a single crop all year round for export. My uncle did not want to sell, but he also needed money to send his daughters to university. Education is costly, he said. And so the land that was so carefully cared for now belongs to a corporation that extracts from it violently all year round. Commercial agriculture is good for rural economies, was the tagline. It was not. It led to deforestation, displacement of people. Land reserved for subsistence use decline. Chemicals leaked into waterways. My uncle left Tandobago and now lives in a small residential community in Hyderabad. He misses being in the fields. Extractive capitalism, in his case, severed the relationship between human, land, animal. And so repair is indeed what this conference invites us to work toward, to document, analyze, and circulate forms of living, life-making, and life-giving that are extant but have been made invisible or marked as inferior in our current condition of coloniality and under the weight of capitalist extraction. Such a project of repair can perhaps ideally take place at liberal arts contexts like Habib University in Pakistan, where support is provided to do scholarship differently, to craft a commons against the onslaught of colonial, capitalist, and statist elites, to have the courage to focus on the ordinary, the mundane, and the marginalia. Thank you for your time and attention.